Hello, welcome to the Friday edition of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter, joined today by Brian Batko. I want to talk about the TJ Watt contract speculations, his posts on social media, the rumors that are floating out there. We're going to do that with Brian. We'll also look at some of the latest top 30 visits for the Steelers, including Derrick Harmon, defensive tackle, what it means that he's coming in, all here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm Chris Carter. He's Brian Batko. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes, as well as your daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here, like Chip Ham and Football every Tuesday with Brian Batko. And as always, you can find this show as always, the show is sponsored, by Edgar Stein and Associates, where not only will they fight for your rights when you've been hurt in an accident or on the job, but also fight for your workers' compensation rights. Call 1-800-94-EDGAR. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Brian, we got to talk about TJ Watt, which doesn't feel like it's always a normal thing here. He's chucking up the deuces. Also, I got yelled at for calling that chucking up the deuces. Someone's like, that's just the peace sign. I'm like, that's the same thing. What are we arguing about here? But
I think that's a Houston term, right? The chunk the deuce, Bun B, and rappers of that southern nature, I think, came up with that one.
I've been saying it since I was like, I don't know, 10. So I don't know, like, chuck up the deuces, whatever it is. It's not a big deal. But either way, if you missed what was happening, you're probably like, what the heck are these guys talking about? TJ Watt, Steelers superstar linebacker, posted a Instagram story. It was just a picture of him with the peace sign or chucking up the deuces, just putting two fingers in the air. And it looked like, a picture that he's a thing that he does all the time that you've seen several pictures of him doing. But of course, when you post that during the offseason, where he's on the last year of a contract and the Steelers are supposed to be negotiating with him, there's a lot of speculation that means that he is out of Pittsburgh and it's over and they're trading him and that this is over and done. And all the hysteria broke out from there. Now, there are some people nationally that said, hey, there's some smoke to that fire, where I think that the one thing that you could say there's some smoke is when J.J. Watt went on national TV and was like, hey, there's a reason why you should pay people before the last year of their contract, which very reminiscent of his brother TJ. But Brian, are you buying that there's a big problem here, or do you think it's just a matter of, you know what, TJ's probably going to ask for a little bit more money than he was going to because of the Myles Garrett contract?
I'm not buying that there's a big problem by any means. It's only April, so the Steelers have 5 more months to figure this out, and TJ and his representation have 5 more months to massage this thing. But yeah, I mean, it certainly did strike me as odd. I tweeted it, and as I put it on Twitter, it's the type of post that's going to give Steelers fans heart palpitations, because I think I saw it like 20 minutes after he put it up. And I mean, hey, did a small part of me think like, all right, we're about to get a huge news bomb here of like Steelers are sending TJ Watt to the Patriots for whatever, or like TJ Watt is stepping away from the game. I mean, who knows? It was just so random. It was so out of the blue. Your mind starts to race. And I mean, the JJ Watt thing was interesting too. I believe he said that on Pat McAfee's show,
Yes.
where he has a weekly appearance. Pat McAfee was in Pittsburgh Wednesday night. I didn't know if the Watt post was going to lead to any sort of Watt like mention or announcement or anything at McAfee. I mean, nobody really knew what was going on there, but we know he's tight with TJ's older brother. Obviously, that didn't happen. We're recording this Thursday afternoon. Maybe by the time you watch this or listen to this, or even by the time we post it, TJ has gone on Twitter or Instagram and said, relax, everybody. Like, I just going through some old photos. Whether that's true or not, maybe he will do that. I don't know. TJ's not picking up the phone to call me and let me know about his cryptic Instagram posts. But yeah, I mean, I think it's not too hard to draw the conclusions of sees the money getting thrown around the NFL, Myles Garrett, Maxx Crosby, Trey Hendrickson going through it right now with the Bengals, Micah Parsons really going through it with the Cowboys, and I'm sure he would like to get paid. And, it's human nature to look around at your peers and say, well, this guy's making that. Why am I not making that? Why am I not making more? So we'll see where this goes. But for right now, it just seems like an oddly timed social media splash from somebody who people weren't really talking about him before Wednesday. And TJ is not dumb. I don't think TJ is an
He's
oblivious
aware.
person. Right. TJ is not an oblivious person like that. So what exactly does it mean? I don't know, Chris, but I guess we'll see.
I guess we'll see. But here's my thing, man. Like, I think even if there's a sense of like, hey, Steelers, I want more money than I would have asked for before, I think the Steelers are going to be like, all right, we'll work on that. I mean, this is the same Steelers that re-signed Cam Hayward last year in the midst of a lot of people saying, no, don't do that. You can't re-sign Cam Hayward. He's old. He's terrible. And then he shows he's still an all-pro defensive tackle. I think they have the same sort of intent with TJ Watt right now. He's a franchise guy. He's a leader. He's still a superstar. I know people are probably like, 11 and a half sacks. That's, he's falling off. I'm like, okay, I wonder if that holds for, if that is the consistent, and he's no longer a guy that can get 15 plus, a lot as he has most of his career, then we'll talk about that when we get there. But I think the Steelers are very willing to just make this happen. And is it going to be more expensive? Sure. Myles Garrett's contract is an average of 40 a year. Danielle Hunter 35.6, Maxx Crosby 35.5, Nick Bosa 34. So is he going to need to be above those guys and around Myles Garrett's number? Probably. But I also think the Steelers don't have a problem paying that because, again, they don't got they're not paying for a franchise quarterback for the future. It's not like they have a Ben Roethlisberger contract saddling him down. You keep players like him around. And I also think to the people that are like, well, just trade him. You're not going to win a Super Bowl right now anyways. I'm like, do you get what's the compensation for TJ Watt that makes you feel good other than 3 first-round picks? Because I feel like a first-round pick, I mean, TJ Watt's as he is for the next 4 years would be better than most first round picks, unless you get like a really high up one. I'm not into the mode of trading away guys that are a surefire thing unless you're getting some massive haul here. And I don't know if someone brings that draft compensation to the trade table for you right now.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think anytime these conversations come up, people kind of lose their minds really on both sides of it. I mean, first of all, you're going to have the Steelers fans who are like, this is TJ Watt we're talking about here. Pay the man his money. Give him every cent he wants and not a cent less. It's like, okay, I get where you're coming from, but the Steelers can't go into any negotiation with any player and say, yes, we will give you whatever you want to make sure you stay in the Steelers. Like, that's just not good business. That's not, it's far from cold and calculating, but it's not even reasonable or rational thought for Omar Khan when he talks to anybody, even an all-time franchise great future Hall of Famer like TJ. On the other side, or kind of in that same pew of, you'll have fans say, well, why do you care? It's not your money. Why do you care how much they pay TJ? Well, that also doesn't really make sense because this is a salary cap league. Exactly. And every dollar that TJ gets or Cam Hayward gets or DK Metcalf gets is less money that you have to spend on other players to build what, you as a fan think is going to be the best roster the Pittsburgh Steelers can possibly have. If all your best players agree to take a 20% hometown discount so you can stay under the cap and get other good players, that would be ideal, but that's also not realistic. People aren't doing that. I can understand people rooting for that, but it's not going to come to pass. On the flip side, the people who are saying, yes, trade TJ, he's not worth Myles Garrett's money, blah, blah, blah. First of all, I think a lot of the same people were probably pounding the table for TJ to be Defensive Player of the Year over Myles Garrett a couple years ago and have steadfastly argued with Browns fans in their lives or on the internet that TJ Watt is better than Myles Garrett. And if you're TJ coming into this bargaining session, you're going to probably sit there and say, okay, yeah, I didn't have the best stretch toward the end there. No one did on our team. We lost 5 games in a row. Mm-hmm. But who's the guy who's getting voted team MVP every year? Yeah. Who's the guy who's selling out jerseys? Who's the guy that's making game-changing plays with strip sacks? He still had 5 forced fumbles last season, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, that's the leg that he has to stand on. So there's always got to be a happy medium reached. They obviously did that eventually in 2021, and both sides benefited from it. TJ got a ton of guaranteed money, highest paid defensive player in the league at the time. And the Steelers got a Defensive Player of the Year season out of him and another really awards season worthy of production out of him after that. So it's gone well to this point. That doesn't always guarantee that it's going to keep going well. And when your brother is on TV hinting at you could have saved if you paid him earlier, now you're going to get you're going to have to pay up a little bit. And let's not be naive about that. JJ and TJ talk all the time. They probably talk every day. I don't know if they talk their contract status every day, but they're always in constant communication. I'm quite certain Big Bro isn't putting that out there without the approval.
Okay. Yeah. I agree right there. But again, I think this is more about maybe there's some contract negotiations where he's going to ask for some more money than he would have before. But I don't think this is the sense where TJ Watt is in the imminent stage of he's about to not be a Pittsburgh Steeler. I think that this is going to be a foregone conclusion. I mean, this I'm telling people right now, this is probably going to drag into OTAs, probably going to drag into minicamp, might even drag into training camp. But I do think that at the end of the day, by the time the season kicks off in September against whoever their home opener is or their season opener is against, I think TJ Watt will have an extension with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, I do too. You and I were both there on Black Trash Bag Day in the Steelers locker room after the playoffs ended, or their playoffs ended. If he were to come out and request a trade or something like that, it would be extremely different tone than he struck with us on that last day before everybody went their separate ways. Now, I'm not discounting that situations can change and wedges can be driven in there by, of course, money and things of that nature. So changes of heart can happen. But the way he was talking that day, I would just be shocked if he flipped all the way over to the other end of the spectrum on this thing and did want out of Pittsburgh. Especially if it was for a reason other than, hey, we are too far apart on this deal.
Yeah, that's where I'm at here. I think there's not going to be something crazy goes, and if he holds in, that might be the extent of it. I would not be shocked if this doesn't go. I would not be shocked if this is resolved and then we all forget about how. I think that's the thing that happens every year, Brian. It's like stuff like this gets posted and things and people rage about it, and then the next year when we're in a similar situation, something else happening. Like I forget what Cam posted. There was one time when Cam tweeted something out and he was like, "That was dumb. I am sorry. Like I should have known how people would react to that." And it was just like,
I think it was when he accidentally liked a tweet criticizing Mike Tomlin, right?
That's what it was. Yeah, and he was just like, he read the first part where someone said something nice about him and then didn't read the second paragraph that was dissing Mike Tomlin.
Yeah,
and he was
people were like,
"Whoa."
what's this passive-aggressive Twitter move by Cam Hayward? What does it mean? Does he want out? And it's like, no, that wasn't the case at all. And yeah, I mean, hey, maybe TJ will come be like, I didn't realize what was going on there. Or maybe he was just like with a buddy and he was like, hey, watch what I can do to the internet.
Yeah, watch me blow up Steelers Twitter with a picture.
Yeah.
And it's like, so I don't put much stock into it. But let's talk about the Steelers and who they're putting stock in the NFL draft, because they brought in some more top 30 visits, including Derrick Harmon, Oregon defensive tackle, one of the major players that we've been talking about as a first-round prospect. We'll talk about that next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, we got to remind you this show is brought to you by Edgar Stein and Associates. Did you know they also do workers' compensation? When you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? Who decides when your treatment is over? And who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. It's the insurance company's doctors. If that makes you uncomfortable, it's not a good thing, Brian. You can't have that. They're not going to be on your side. So you need someone on your side. Who's going to be on your side? That's Edgar Stein and Associates. You call them today, 1-800-94-EDGAR, and they will fight with everything they have for the workers' compensation rights that you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's talk about Derrick Harmon being a top 30 visit for the Pittsburgh Steelers coming in this week. It's everyone was hyped on Shedeur Sanders. We talked a little bit about that with Ray on Wednesday. But Derrick Harmon, one thing that we did talk about too was how Derrick Harmon hadn't been brought in, Kenneth Grant hadn't been brought in. Walter Nolen hadn't been brought in. Those are the 3 first-round defensive tackles. If you were wondering, is defensive tackle not really a want? And as we were kind of talking about, this was where here it comes. This is part of what's going to be. And we'll get into who else might be coming, because the Steelers do have several slots left here. But I think that part of getting, saving these a little bit for the later part of the visit process. You never know what could go into the scheduling of things, but I think that this further shows, and I wouldn't be shocked if we see the other top defensive tackles come in. I think it further shows there is a serious want to make that the thing that they resolve with this first round pick, as long as these guys fall down to them.
Yeah, and usually the guys who do get brought in for visits, they've got maybe one or two question marks about them, whether it's injury history or character concerns. I mean, in Derrick Harmon's case, really neither of that, but he did transfer from Michigan State to Oregon, so it might not hurt to get a guy in face to face and say, hey, what happened there? What made you change? Do you think you got better from that switch? And also he's somebody who, if he ends up in Pittsburgh, it's going to be as a first rounder, almost certainly. So I think you probably want to pick guys' brains about, hey, you're dealing with the expectations, being a first round pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Assess kind of the mental of that. I'm sure the Steelers are doing a lot of that with Shedeur Sanders as well. He would be under the microscope even more than a defensive lineman would.
Yes.
To say the least. So I think you surely want to get try to get inside his brain a little, like, okay, how would he handle this if he does slip to 21 and now he's our pick? But Harmon, I think, just makes a lot more sense. I think he's a lot more likely to end up being the Steelers' first round pick than Shedeur, because I still happen to think, and Adam Bittner and I are going to talk about this more on the Sunday draft show, I still think Shedeur is going to go in the top 10. And if not, somebody trades up to grab him in the top 20 before the Steelers could anyway. So with Harmon, he does seem to be a pretty clean prospect, not a lot of projection when you look at his size and his frame and what Oregon's defense asked him to do. He is kind of like your prototypical Steelers, 3 technique, Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt-ish. They love those big bodies. I remember, Chris, when they drafted Isaiah Loudermilk a few years ago, and I think collectively a lot of us who cover the team were sort of like, really? They just traded up to go get this guy who, pick your favorite draft analyst, probably said he was like a 6th to 7th round pick, and they traded a future 4th to take him in the 5th. And Kevin Colbert was asked about that, and he's like, look, there just aren't many humans out there with this combination of height, weight, wingspan and all that. And Derrick Harmon is one of those guys as well, but he obviously has a lot better production at the college level, athleticism than Loudermilk. So yeah, I'm not surprised at all that they brought him in. I think I also may have misspoke on one of the other draft videos that I don't think he was at the Senior Bowl for the Steelers to meet with there. And we know they didn't go to Oregon's Pro Day. So yeah, I mean, he make perfect sense for them to bring him here and get to know him better.
No, yeah, I think that's certainly the case there. But I look at, like, I think you brought up something really interesting about like the Stephon Tuitt thing. That's what this team, I think, one of the things that of the many things that they've been missing that they were hoping to have. Stephon Tuitt's retirement is still something that they have not resolved since it happened in after the 2020 season.
Yeah.
When he got hurt and ended that season, there was the assumption he was coming back and he was gonna be the next Cam Hayward. Like, the two of them were still gonna be maybe the best 1-2 punch defensive tackle in the NFL for the next 5-6 years together. And then he retired, and then they brought in Larry Ogunjobi, and he was okay, but he's not dominant. They need that presence in the middle, and not only with Cam Hayward now, but for the future. And so that's where I look at Derrick Harmon, and I'm very intrigued by him. I still think Kenneth Grant I rank ahead of him, but I think that they're in a situation where if Grant or Harmon fall to them at 21, either one of them they're very happy with taking, because they want to have those guys up the middle. And when those guys are there, it makes the jobs of TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith that much easier, because then offensive lines can't devote everything to, our number one job is to line up on that side and not let TJ Watt get clean, because if you're devoting too much time to that, you might be able to slow down one Cam Hayward. When you focus on Cam Hayward too much, then the other defensive tackle isn't just a solid guy that can beat you if you make a mistake, but a really good player like Stephon Tuitt was. That's a problem, and that allows your front to do so much more damage. That's what they're trying to get in this draft class, is a guy who can be that kind of wrecker in the middle of the defense, and how that'll make everything easier across the board, while also being a guy that can take on double teams. That's another thing I think they struggled with. And when I talked to Derrick Harmon at the Combine, he talked about how he worked on taking on double teams, how to split them easier, and how to get into the backfield, but also how to hold them up so he can keep his linebackers clean. he has the mind of, and he talked about how he studies Cam Hayward, he studies Chris Jones, because he knows that's his body type and he needs to do things like them if he wants to be an elite NFL player. And I think all those things, they add up for me, Brian. And it's why that position is so important for them to get right this year, because if they do, and it lasts long term, and Keanu Benton works out, you could be in a position where that is once again an ace in the hole for you, time and time again. And the run defense does return to not allowing Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson to run all over you.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers have found some decent defensive linemen to pair with Cam Hayward since Stephon Tuitt's, unforeseen retirement, but no other, Bash brother quite like that with the same frame and build up front, the way that those two could just wreck shop as a couple twin towers in there when you're in your nickel. And, like you said, Chris, two gapping and allowing for those one-on-one matchups as often as possible for the outside linebackers. And, that's a big reason, why I have Grant and Harmon above Walter Nolen. I think they're both better Steelers fits schematically. I think there are less question marks about them, beyond just the X's and O's aspect of it. I mean, the Steelers traditionally, it just makes sense with that odd front. You want your outside linebackers to be, a little bit on the smaller side than your typical defensive end would be in a 4-3, and thus they're going to be faster and quicker. But then you need your inside guys to be a little bit bigger than your typical attacking, penetrating defensive tackle in an even front. So that's why the Steelers have gravitated toward those types. That's why you go all the way back to the 2011 or 2013 draft with Aaron Donald, and it was, this guy's amazing, but does he really fit the Steelers scheme? Now we know in retrospect, surely he probably would have been fine, but that is why you see them linked more to the Derrick Harmons of the world than the Walter Nolens of the world. So, and Grant, I might have him a little above Harmon as well, Chris, just because I think there's a better chance that he's got some of that pass rushing juice, a little quicker get off perhaps than Harmon. But I think those are going to be the two that when I'm sitting down to do my final Steelers mock draft, I feel like I'm going to find myself picking one or the other.
No, I'm right. I'm right with you. I think that there's, I've done several mocks where, unofficial mocks where I've picked those guys. It's been like a priority. Like that is the guy there, not only just from my sense of what I think they should do, but also from what I've heard that they probably will do in that situation. But there's still plenty of time to go over things, and the Steelers do have about 7-ish more, I think, visits that they can schedule. We'll talk about who they have scheduled, who they haven't scheduled yet, and what positions or what players they might be looking at to fill out the rest of their top 30 visits next here on the North Shore Drive podcast on the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Brian Batko. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by UFC Gym Pittsburgh. Are you ready to train like a champion? UFC Gym has everything for total body health under one roof. They have group classes from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to Zumba, personal training, cardio, weights, cryotherapy, infrared saunas, and more, and all for an unbeatable price. Not sure where to begin? All members get a starter session with an expert coach to help map out your fitness plan. Your first visit's on us. Drop in with free parking at Market Square or the waterfront, and follow UFC Gym Pittsburgh on social media. Train different, feel unstoppable at UFC Gym. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Brian Batko. Brian, let's talk about these top 30 visits. Now, again, the top 30 visits are just the allowed amount of NFL draft prospects you're allowed to invite to your facility to meet with them in person so that you can get a sense of them, they can get a sense of you, and you can better investigate what's going on there. You also are allowed to when you get that, when you do that, when you're doing the top 30 visits, you get to invite local local prospects, guys that are from the area or went to university within a certain radius. So like Gavin Bartholomew's been there. Donovan McMillan was brought in this week. Got prominent Pitt players there. So that's part of the formula here. But Brian, we've seen quite a few guys in here, but there are some positions where I feel like the Steelers could have poked a little bit more at with certain guys as far as who they'd want to bring in. One position, I think, is cornerback, where they've only brought in Azareye'h Thomas as far as some of the top guys, top cornerbacks there, but no Jahdae Barron or Will Johnson, which guys they might have to trade up for, or if they magically fell down to them, but no Trey Amos, no Maxwell Hairston or Siobhan Revell, no Benjamin Morrison or Darian Porter, guys that could be earlier guys in the draft. But so when you look at names like that, or maybe some of the receivers they haven't brought in, what do you think is going to be their priority with these last several visits they have here?
Yeah, Chris, I want to say they've got 9 still officially to use, of course, not
9.
counting the locals. About 5, I want to say, have been reported to be happening, and I think one of those that might be today as you're listening to this is Shamar Stewart from Texas A&M. That's been out there. He would not fit as nicely into the typical Steelers down lineman mold, but you see him listed as an edge rusher some places. You see him listed just as a D lineman or DN some places. They could potentially put some weight on him. I think he was at 280 on the Texas A&M roster, but showed up to the combine 267 and then broke the combine with one of the most insane athletic scores for a defensive lineman literally ever in the history of the event. So he's obviously a very intriguing candidate for anybody's first round pick. He might end up going way higher than where the Steelers are. But that's an interesting one if he does indeed visit, follow through on what's been reported. So then I think, leave 4 spots that we don't know yet who it's going to be. I'm not like hung up really on the lack of corners. I think it just shows you that they're not in the market as much as we thought they would be, at least not after signing Darius Slay, and to a lesser extent Brandon Echols. I think there's probably still at least some belief behind the scenes in Corey Trice. Jahdae Barron from Texas, they saw him at Texas's pro day. Same thing with the big D lineman that they have down there in Austin. I guess I would like to see them bring in Walter Nolen, just to kind of cover their bases and check all the boxes with a player like that who is fairly polarizing in the NFL draft scouting community. Ty Robinson and CJ West are a couple more like, second tier defensive tackle types.
Right.
And Darius Alexander from Toledo, I would throw him in there as well as somebody who, really productive, but in the MAC. So sometimes I think it helps to talk to those guys in person. And, I think those are 3 more prospects that maybe the Steelers will have come in. Maybe it would make sense to have those players come in. But we know they've gone heavy already on the D line, so they might want to spread the love a little bit more to other positions.
And Walter Nolen did say he talked to the Steelers at the Senior Bowl, but when I asked him directly, have you talked to him at the combine? He was like, no, I have not, and he was pretty stern about that. And I was like,
maybe they didn't like what they heard at the Senior Bowl.
Maybe they did.
All right.
Yeah, and also like, hey, like, you know what? Sometimes like it's very like there's some guys that they talk to at one and don't talk to at another. Like you brought up, they didn't talk to Derrick Harmon at the Senior Bowl. Was that because they didn't like Derrick Harmon? Obviously not, because they brought him in for a top 30 visit. But
no, I think he wasn't there. I think that was the issue.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah. Never mind. I thought I saw him in a Senior Bowl jersey for some reason. But but either way, there's
there's always the layer too of like, do teams want to kind of downplay their interest in a prospect,
right,
especially right now, like where the Steelers are picking, the Falcons, Cardinals, Dolphins in front of them. I mean, they could all need defensive line help this year, but I think that's less of a concern just because there are so many good D linemen in this class. I don't know that it's not like anybody expects Kenneth Grant or Derrick Harmon or somebody or Walter Nolen is going to slip to the second round and they can take him again. So
right.
I think there are less games that you play like that when you get into number 21 overall.
One thing I saw about receivers and who they brought in so far, they brought in Matthew Golden, an obvious first round prospect that everyone's talked about. But the other receivers they brought in so far are Jaden Higgins, Trey Harris, Jalen Noel. I think Savion Williams is another one. But no Emeka Egbuka or Luther Burden, two of the first round guys that are expected to be more available to the Steelers. They might get taken before, who knows? But does that poke your interest at all? Is sort of seeing like, hey, like they've only brought in one of the 3 guys that people think could be available to them in the first round. Maybe they are backing off wide receiver.
No, because I think they are backing off wide receiver. I think the DK Metcalf trade changed the calculus there pretty much entirely. And, with Egbuka, I mean, that's another one. They're a staple at the Ohio State Pro Day every year. They were there again this year. So I'm sure they've had a lot of exposure to him already. Probably no need to waste one of your 30 visits on that guy, and especially somebody like him who's such a clean, projectable prospect. I would say the same goes for those 2 running backs out of Columbus, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. I wouldn't worry if they don't come through the South Side that the Steelers aren't going to be considering them at any point. I think the receivers that they've brought in, other than Golden, make a lot of sense, because I think when they do these visits, Chris, it's like, all right, you're bringing in guys that if they fall to you in, say, the third round this year, considering they don't have a second round pick,
right,
you're initially going to be wondering, probably to some extent, like, well, why did this guy slip? Why did all other 31 teams let him get to us here in the third round? But if you've done your due diligence and you've done your homework on these guys and you've spent time with them in person, or you've asked about their background, or you've maybe had them, get on the board a little bit and talk some football with you as an assistant or whatever, you're probably going to be more comfortable with being the team that stops the slide on a receiver who was supposed to go in the second, or a D lineman who was supposed to go in the second. You know what I mean?
No, I know exactly what you mean. And part of, again, you're doing these for different parts. Like the Steelers, they brought in Alfred Collins out of Texas he's a defensive tackle prospect. They're not thinking of taking him in the first round, but if he slips to them later in the draft, like in that third round range, or if they trade up, I see that, and that's part of what you're doing here at these top 30 visits. They're not necessarily the top 30 prospects; they're just guys that you think that you want to get a closer look at for whatever reason. Whether that's you think they're going to fall to them. There's also guys that sometimes you're like, hey, you know what, this guy is probably not going to be available to us, but we do want to check in with this because he could be one of those guys that Mike Tomlin wants to call back to, like Patrick Queen later in their careers. Be like, I want to make sure that this guy is who I think he is, and, in case of an emergency, but also in case of the future as well. So,
Nick Eamon, the safety from South Carolina, I feel like is kind of like that, because I'd be even more surprised if they took a safety in the first round than a wide receiver.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you never know. They might just have players that they have really high grades on and they really like, and they want to learn more about them. And get, be blown away by the player and the person. And other times, like I was talking about, being that team that stops the slide and kind of allaying any concerns you had. Like the Steelers did stop the slide on Peyton Wilson last year, who was filled with medical concerns, and Darnell Washington the year before, who was filled with medical concerns and some playing style concerns coming out of Georgia. So they obviously felt really comfortable from having those two in for pre-draft visits to then be the team that takes them in the third round. And then when we're all dissecting the draft Friday night or Saturday night, everyone's sitting there saying, man, the Steelers got a steal in these two dudes.
No, I'm right. I think that's part of what the Steelers are doing, is that they're checking all those boxes that they can check and make sure, like, hey, is this the guy? I mean, Darnell Washington, has he been dominant force? No, but he's been a very solid addition, like a good role playing piece for the Steelers. And again, for what was it, a fourth round pick? So
late third, yeah.
A late third, that's right. That's why they traded. They got the pick back, but still, again, like that's part of what you're trying to do there, is find those types of guys, and you never know who those guys might be. Peyton Wilson had a heck of a rookie year for what they got him for, and there's always those types of guys throughout the draft process. I think the other group that the Steelers have spent a lot of top 30 visits on is that running back group. Not just the top guy like Omar and Hampton, who projects to be the first running back off the board after Ashton Jeanty, but they've also looked at Basil Tootin out of Virginia Tech. They've also looked at Caleb Johnson. They've also looked at Dylan Sampson. I think DJ Giddens. Yeah. What was it? DJ Giddens, Dylan Sampson, and
it's been reported that RJ Harvey is going to
RJ Harvey. Yeah, that was the last one. Yeah. But again, like that's what I just named, 6 running backs or so. Like that's a lot of running backs to be looking at. That shows that they're definitely interested. But again, those guys, outside of Hampton, those guys are all second, third round guys.
Yeah. And I think recent years have shown us, like we said, or even fourth with some of those that might slip. But in this class, at least, maybe they would have been second or third round running backs in previous years. But the Steelers don't mind telegraphing what positions they're looking at with the visits. It's more, I think it's far more significant to them to cover all their bases with a prospect and, really flesh out that entire scouting report again, especially on the ones who, hey, we didn't make it to Troy Fautanu's pro day last year out in Seattle. We didn't make it to Taliesa Fuaga's pro day in Corvallis. So we're going to bring them here to the South Side to get to know them better if we're going to spend a first round pick on them.
Absolutely. He's Brian Batko. I'm Chris Carter. You've been watching or listening to the North Shore Drive podcast on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes that we do, and the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Be sure to subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette at post-gazette.com. Catch us here Monday as we enter the final week before the draft. Who are some of those other visits that come in? We'll keep it right here with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.